Hello, you're watching the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today I have a slightly different thing than normal. We're talking about the UK 2024 general election. Now, unfortunately, because of the nature of the snap election and the nature of the current time we're in, I don't have a normal projection model. I did not have time to make it, and I do not have time to set aside to spin one up in the middle of the election. There's not the time. So you're not going to see forecasts from me. There's a bunch of other people who have forecasts. If you want to look at those, you can look at those. But I thought I would take some time and I would hit a few talking points on this, because there is things to discuss here. Because there's actually quite an interesting mechanic going on with this race. So we'll touch on that later on in the video. Now, before I begin anything else, just once again, like to shout out all my channel members. It really appreciate you guys backing up the channel, give me support. If you guys want to support the channel, by all means, go down into the description below and press the join button. And if you don't want to do, or if you can't afford to do that, I understand the economy sucks. Yeah, right. Just do your basic YouTube things then. Like, share, subscribe, comment below. Believe me, those help quite a bit. But let's begin. So we can see here that I have this up. This is from Wikipedia, not my own image. The Conservatives have been, in the UK, trending down for years now. Really, since the end of COVID, it's just been a collapse. We've seen Boris Johnson get removed. Then we had a very short-lived Truss, and she got removed, and now we're on Rishi Sunak. And Sunak's been in for a little more than a year now. I think it's a year and a half. Doesn't really matter. And he's just not done anything useful for the Conservatives. He's been a empty suit. But we're going to get into that more. And this entire time, we've seen the Labour's been flattish. In the mid-40s, 44, 45% range. Pretty flat. And the Conservatives are trending downwards. But in more recent days, there has been an escalation. I'm trying to find the raw polls here. I want the opinion polls. Pardon me. Here we go. There has been a shakeup. And that shakeup is on June 3rd, Nigel Farage became the leader of Reform UK. Now, prior to that, it was Richard Tice. And Tice does not have anywhere near the name recognition or the popularity that Farage does. Farage, by some polls, is the most popular politician in the UK. And he's by far one of the most well-known politicians in the UK. He has almost 100% name recognition, depending on the poll. And what we're seeing now is some of these polls have the Reform 17, 16, 17, 16, 16. See, there's a bunch. Now, there's some other ones that are putting them still in 11, 12 range, so there is some debate and some uncertainty here. This Ipsos poll we can mostly ignore here because it was done mostly before Nigel Farage became leader. But you can really see the difference here. So this, before he came in, it's like 9, 10 something percent. And now we're 14 to 17, give or take. And interestingly, it's not just Reform who's gained ground from the Conservatives. Because you can see here, Conservatives were going, 24, 27. Now they're like, 19 to 24, 26. So they're definitely been siphoning support from that, but it also seems to be siphoning support from Labour, which is quite interesting. Will that turn into anything? I don't know. We'll see. But there is the potential that this Reform growth could turn into something really big. And I think there's an underlying mechanic here that's causing some of this shift. Now, we can talk about, as I've done before, we could talk about factions and politics and inter-party disputes and how coalitions form and how swing voters move around, and we could talk all about that. But I've talked about that in Canadian context quite a bit, so I don't think I need to necessarily hash it out here as clearly, because my previous videos have really touched on that. Comment below if you want me to try to do another one with like a more in-depth on that for the UK. I don't make any promises that I'll have one before July 4th, but we'll see. But here, there's another underlying mechanic that I want to touch on. And that is the quality of the leader. Now, I've not talked about leaders as often in abstract. I've talked about how, say, Poilievre was better than O'Toole, or in podcasts with Wyatt, I might have talked about replacing Trudeau is probably not going to do anything. But I've not talked about what skills, what things make someone a leader, makes them a good leader. Now, I'll be honest. Some of this content in the video might annoy people because a lot of this is going to be vibe. And I know a lot of people don't like that, but that's what it is. It's true. And there's just a certain way, a certain je ne sais quoi, a certain attribute of someone leader that puts that. We have a term for this, actually. Well-accepted term. A term that people don't consider to be arbitrary. Charisma. But charisma is just an old-fashioned word for vibe. It's the same thing. Someone's charisma is just their vibe. Again, this is neither good nor bad. You need to have charisma. You need to have a vibe. But that's what it is. A lot of this is not... I'm sure if I sat down with a bunch of people and did a lot of data analysis, I could get a systematized way to figure out a leader. But we're not there yet. Don't have the funding. Don't have the time. Don't have the resources. But for now, we'll go through things. So we're going to start first here. I'm going to call this the static photo test. This is Rishi Sunak. This is his official portrait. And I want you to look at this for a second. And look in here. Now, don't fall into the trap of like looking into how do I want to explain this? Basically, you have to look how he's holding himself. The way he's looking at the camera. I'll explain in a moment, but we're gonna cut to a video of Sunak speaking as a useful juxtaposition, because this is how he presents himself in portrait, and this is how he presents himself in a speech. Now, I did not particularly pick this speech because he's in the rain, haha, funny, funny. I picked this speech because I did not want any speeches here for this video that were explicitly contemporary political issues. I did not want to be touching election issues. Yeah, this is about calling the election, but it's not a contemporary issue. If that makes sense. So we're going to hit this off here.
Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future. To decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July. This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War.
Now, what I want you to see from this, and see in his body language, and how he's acting here. He's pensive. He's a little worried. He's not very confident. There's kind of this energy here that he thinks, that he knows he's taking a very big risk. You can really see it in how he's acting. Just look at... We're going to mute him for a second. But just look how he glances at the paper and how he goes back up. The way his eyes are going. There is a very clear pensiveness to him. He's not certain. He's out of his element. This is not what he wants to be doing. He does not want to be here. And that's very important. Voters see that. Voters see someone who's presenting them in this pensive, uncertain, out of their field, out of their element way, and they pick up on that. They pick up on this guy doesn't really want to be here, the way he's giving to us. And then we'll go back to this portrait here. What do we see in this portrait? At first glance, it just looks like a man in a suit taking a photo. But in the way his lips are pursed, the way his eyes are looking at the camera, the way his face is centered, it kind of betrays to me like an uncertainty to him. that he's not in the right circumstance, that he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that shouldn't be surprising once you learn into his background. Now, I'll be really clear here. Your background does not necessarily mean you're good or bad at being a leader. But if you compare his uneasiness in this photo, in this speech, in every other speech, like you look at those videos, I don't have them queued up here, but you look at videos of him going on like the train during the election in the UK, and there's a fundamental, he's fish out of water. He doesn't really know what he's doing or there. And you look into his background, he is a scion of seemingly upper middle class family, went in to be a successful investment banker, made a lot of money, investment banker, married a billionaire. And once you have that context, and you look at how he's acting here, and what he's doing here, what he's saying here, how he's acted as the prime minister, the fact that he seems uncertain, the fact he seems out of his element, out of the water, like he doesn't want to be here, like he's in the wrong place. And it starts putting together. Fundamentally, he's probably is actually not in the right place. He probably doesn't want to be here. And it's a real good question on why he wanted to become prime minister. And that's probably something we'll find out later on in his life. He'll probably write a book after he loses the election. Decisively. But what this all says is he is essentially an upper middle class merchant guy who's pretending to the audience to be more of an aristocrat, more of a upper class person, because now he currently is in the upper class. But as I'm going to touch on later on in my series, and I touched on some articles before that I pulled on my Substack, your class that you are is pretty much decided by the time you've grown up. It's the class you are as a young adult is really the class you are. You don't become the upper class, like suave aristocrat because you became a billionaire later in life. You only become an aristocrat if you're born with money. You can't do it otherwise. It's not possible. And in the UK, possibly because of how the society is structured, possibly, I don't know, class envy maybe from Sunak's part, he wants to try to mimic this view. And you can kind of, again, see it in how he's speaking here.
Who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children. Now, I cannot and will not claim that we have got everything right. No government should.
The important thing to hit on here, again, don't focus on what he's saying. What he's saying doesn't matter here. The way he's saying it is what matters. He's trying to come across as a paternal figure. In other words, an aristocratic archetype. That he's watching out for the nation. And now, you could say lots of prime ministers do that, but it's not always the same thing. In fact, you look at someone like Pierre Poilievre, and he has a very different speech style. Don't have any videos of that queued up, but you'll take my word for it. You can watch some of them online. He has plenty of them. He speaks very differently than Sunak speaking here. And it's not just a cultural thing, because we're going to show up Starmer and Farage, and you can see there's going to be a big difference here. But, well, with no further ado, let us hit it up. So, this is Starmer's official portrait. And I want you to juxtapose this again with Sunak's. We can even split scope. That's Farage's. We don't want to do that right now. We will split screen this so we can have a good chance. Wow, look at this on-fly editing. Isn't this fantastic? Now notice the difference between these two photos. He's sharply dressed, clean. He's a little more disheveled. Not disheveled, but like it's not as crisp, not as clean. But whereas he's not as crisp and clean, Starmer, versus Sunak, Sunak doesn't look comfortable. He doesn't look like he really wants to be here. Starmer's confident, and he's looking in the camera like, yeah, of course you're taking my photo. And there's a difference here. Like, this is not just vibes. This actually matters. And you can't... And the point is not to say Sunak has to act like Starmer. It's actually the exact opposite point I'm trying to make here with this video, is that you do not want to act like someone you are not. If the way you're acting does not match the way you feel, voters will know this. They will sense something is wrong. They'll feel uneasy, they won't like it, and they're not going to go for it. We've seen this many a time in many elections where a leader is trying to be someone they're not. And part of that is how they present themselves, how they talk to themselves, how they present themselves. But let us take a video here of Starmer speaking now. This is from the other day, and this part of the speech, that I'm not going to play the whole speech, obviously, for time. And also copyright reasons, obviously. If you want to watch the speech, just go to the Sky News video here. You can watch the whole thing. That's not the relevant part of this video. The relevant part here is we're talking about how Starmer speaks, how he's holding himself. So the context here is he's going to be talking about World War II. That's all you need to know. D-Day. It was after D-Day.
Now this week is the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So I want to start by remembering the bravery of those soldiers who sailed from the south of England to the beaches of France. Their individual courage and collective strength of our troops, who sacrificed that day turned the tide of the Second World War, brought liberation to Europe.
Okay, now juxtapose this again with this last section.
The bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children. Now, I cannot and will not claim that we have got everything right. No government should.
Now, the noticeable difference you should see between these two segments here is Sunak is trying to present himself as a more of a stern, paternal figure who's looking out for the interest of the nation, not his political future. And he comes across as a little uneasy, unsteady, uncertain, unconfident, and it's not a good look. I mean, the fact that it's raining also makes this worse, but we're neglecting that for now. Whereas this clip of Starmer here, and much of the speech is the same thing. He does actually pull off that exact energy that Sunak is trying to do. Stern, above the meat grinder, looking out for the best interest of the nation. That's the vibe he's pulling off. Whether you believe or agree with his politics for either of these candidates, completely unrelated to this. That doesn't matter here. We're not saying, is Sunak better than Starmer or whatever. We're just talking about one factor why Starmer is beating Sunak in the polls and why things might change shortly. And I'll get to that more in a second. So, to finish off this stretch, let us touch on the last of the three main leaders here that I think are relevant for this conversation. Nigel Farage. Now, this is a great photo for Farage. It's not an official photo. It was just a one taken at, I think, the campaign event where he now said he's becoming the leader of the Reform UK for this election. And notice his expression compared to this. Yeah, this is an official photo. It's going to be different. But it's very different. Compare this again. Very different. The energy between these two photos is very categorically different. Just look at this. Here, Starmer is stern, looking forward, confident, strong. Farage is more easy. He's comfortable in his own skin. He knows who he is. He's confident, and he's not that concerned about you. He's not concerned about a threat. That's kind of the energy he's given off here. And this is important. People pick up on this. And we're going to pick you. This is, again, unrelated to the current election for the best I can do, while still having an actual good soundbite of what I need to go. This is Farage's exit speech right before the Brexit officially occurs.
And over 20 years here in this Parliament. I'm not particularly happy with the agreement we're being asked to vote on tonight, but Boris has been remarkably bold in the last few months, and Ms von der Leyen, he's made it clear, he's promised us there'll be no level playing field. And on that basis, I wish him every success in the next round of negotiations, I really do. But the most significant point is this. What happens at 11 p.m. this Friday, the 31st of January, 2020?
Now, this is a very different style to what we saw Starmer. Starmer, in that speech, and trust me, you can look at other speeches of Starmer. They're very similar. I picked an apolitical one for a reason, though. I didn't want to bog this down in nitty-gritty stuff about politics and campaign here. That's not that relevant. Again, really stressing that. Starmer was going for, again, stern parental figure. Everything's bad. I'm going to get in control. In a sense, he's trying to go for the dad energy, if you will. Sunak is also trying to do the exact same thing. But he's failing at it because that's not who Sunak is. That's not his background. That's not his character. He can't play the stern aristocrat because he isn't that person. Now, juxtapose this with Farage. Farage also really isn't that person. He's not a stern aristocrat. In fact, let's double check his background here. In a lot of ways, Farage actually is a very good mirror to Sunak. He comes from a very similar background. Worked in finance, came from a middle to upper middle class family, who also worked in finance. Very similar background to Sunak. But the difference is, Farage knows who he is. Farage isn't trying to play a role he's not. He's not that, so what does he do? How does he present himself? Well, he presents himself as more of the confident firebrand. I know what I'm doing, and I'm sticking by it. The ideologue. You could even call it more somewhat demagogue-y, but I think that's uncharitable. But he's going for the politician angle, if that makes sense. Whereas Starmer was going for more of an aristocrat angle. Same with Sunak. Farage is coming at this and how he handles politics more like a generic politician does. But he doesn't just act like a generic politician. He has his mannerisms, his speaking patterns, his passion behind it. And that takes the generic politician and polishes it up into something more interesting, something that you want to watch him speak. He's an interesting speaker. Compare this with Sunak. He's not that interesting. You don't really want to watch him. He doesn't seem very comfortable doing when he's speaking. And then Starmer is also not a very interesting speaker. He's very dry, very boring. That's not a bad thing in the right circumstance, in the right time, in the right campaign. If he is the incumbent prime minister and things are going fine, that's actually a really good vibe to go with. That's something you actually kind of want. If things are going well, people don't want the boat rocked. But when things aren't going well, people might want the boat rocked. I'm just going to play another part of this clip here again, so we can just, again, refresh ourselves on Farage.
20 marks the point of no return. Once we've left, we are never coming back, and the rest, frankly, is detail. We're going, we will be gone. And that should be the summit of my own political ambitions. I walked in here, as I've said before, you all thought it was terribly funny. You stopped laughing in 2016. But my view has changed of Europe since I joined. In 2005...
Again, we see this kind of difference in energy that Farage has. He is more confident. He knows what he's doing. He's more free, more open, more flexible. His body language is more open. So what does this all mean? What am I going with this? We don't really normally do this kind of stuff often here. So the gist of what I'm saying here is voters look for the right person at the time. Now, there's filters on that. They need someone who's saying the right things, has the right positions, who's of the right persuasion. All those things matter. You're not going to see someone who's just saying the thing in the correct manner of speech, using the correct phrasing, doesn't make you win. But if you say the right rhetoric with the right phrasing, with the right energy, with the right look, with the right everything, that's how your campaign wins. At the end of the day, an election campaign is about really 4 things. What are you going to do? How are you describing what you're going to do? In other words, platform, rhetoric. Third one is phrasing. Phrasing is different than rhetoric. Rhetoric is the actual details of what you are going to say, the actual words, if you will, and the phrasing is how you say those words. I could deliver this video in a different cadence, in a different pitch, in a different intonation, and it's going to change the meaning of the video. Obviously, it's not going to be as wild as some tonal languages like, say, like Mandarin or something, but even in English, the emphasis of a sentence can change based on how I pronounce it, how I say it, how I phrase it, the speed I'm going. If you remember back to your poetry from high school or junior high, that's exactly what poetry is. Poetry is all about playing with phrasing. That is almost the point of poetry. If dissertations and essays and speeches are the domain of rhetoric, phrasing is the domain of poetry. And those things matter. And then the final one is the look. You have to have the right look to it. I'm not saying we need to be superficial with how we do politics, but if you are trying to go with, say, the Starmer route, you want to be more aristocratic, you want to be more confident, paternal, stern, we're going to hold this country together, we're going to fix the problems, I'm the guy in charge. You have to have the right look for that. If you're trying to go doing the same thing, the same style as Starmer, and instead of looking like this, you look like, let's take a contrasting example. To juxtapose, if you, instead of being Starmer, pulling an attitude and a facial expression, because it's not just the clothes you're wearing, it's also how you hold yourself, your posture, your demeanor, your facial expression, your haircuts, all that stuff, right? Instead of looking something like this most of the time, you see Starmer looking kind of like Trudeau does on campaign, when he's more relaxed, when he's not doing more formal thing. That wouldn't work. It works for Trudeau because Trudeau's plan is going for a different look, a different phrasing, a different rhetoric style. But the way Trudeau dresses and acts and holds himself, it works for Trudeau. It would not work for Starmer. Starmer would be failing. It would look weird. People would be off-put by it. Same way that if Starmer, looking the way Starmer does, was acting like how Trudeau acts, it would look wrong. People would be really off-put by this. In a lot of ways, this is kind of what Sunak is doing. He's kind of having the styling and the energy, or attempting to have the energy of someone like a Trudeau, but he's also trying to package it in a formal pseudo-aristocratic lens, and it doesn't work. And I would say, even ignoring platforms, even ignoring the main issues of the race, which the main issues of the race really skew against the Conservatives, because objectively they've just done a bad job at like everything. But anyways, it's another topic for another time. But if we're just looking at objectively how these different leaders act and behave amongst themselves, it doesn't really make any sense to think that I'm going to phrase this. There really is no path for Sunak here. The guy is genuinely screwed because it's too late to change how he wants to act and phrase. Maybe if he's really talented with a really good team, he could try to pull off a mid-election rotation, but we're almost a quarter way in. It's probably too late for that. So Sunak is delivering, essentially, if we're going to boil down the package here, the Conservatives have a bad platform because no one trusts their platform, because they're saying they're going to do things like cut immigration, which they haven't done for 14 years, so no one trusts that. Their rhetoric is weak because no one trusts the underlying package. The phrasing isn't good because Sunak doesn't know how to present himself. In the last debate, he had someone else surrogate for him. I don't know how common that is in the UK. Maybe it's more common than Canada or the US, but it's completely unheard of in North America. You would never do that. That'd be wild. And the look doesn't jive. Nothing of the Conservative campaign here is lined up together. It's not working together. It's not set. It's not jiving. And then conversely, you have Labour. And where is Labour? Well, there's some questions about platform for Labour. It's less certain. It's not as clear. There's a lot of people who don't fully trust. There's uncertainty in Labour's package on the platform because a lot of people don't really trust Labour after how Corbyn acted. And there's reasonable apprehension that Starmer might be trying to pull a ruse over it, wool over people's heads. But ignoring that question, you look at the rhetoric. His rhetoric is solid. It makes perfect sense, given the issues that he's trying to campaign on. Given his platform, his rhetoric does well. Okay. How does he phrase it? He's phrasing it in this aristocratic, stern, paternal figure view, which jives with his underlying rhetoric. It works together. It's harmonized. And again, this feeds into the platform, and it works. And then styling, I just touched on it. He does pull off the styling that his phrasing and his rhetoric demands. In fact, I would possibly suggest here, I don't know all the information underneath the hood, but it's almost more likely to me that he has this aesthetic, and then they build everything after that, but we'll see. Maybe someday that'll come out, but that's how I imagine it would do, because it's easier to go with your aesthetic, your phrasing, your how you are as a person, and then build from there than the other way around. Because if you go the other way around, you get someone like Sunak. And then we have Farage and Reform. So Reform's platform on the core issues of the election is probably the strongest one because there's very little doubt in people's minds that Farage doesn't believe what he's saying, or he's going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. People probably, for the most part, trust what Farage is saying is what Farage is meaning. And then the rhetoric, again, scoops into that. His rhetoric, it does, for the actual election issues, it does frame things properly. It works with his platform. His phrasing, how he phrases his rhetoric, also works just fine. And then his appearance, his visual, his styling that also does kind of lend into this. It lends into his character. It works with his phrasing. It works with his rhetoric. All these things work together. So of all of these, the most properly constructed leader campaign is Farage's. And then we have Starmer, and then we have Sunak. And Sunak's leader campaign is abysmal. It's the most unconnected one I have seen in a while. He's trying to be someone he isn't. And everyone knows he's trying to be someone he isn't, but he still does it, and he knows everyone knows, so he feels really uncomfortable with it, so he's even worse. It's a vicious loop-back cycle. Now, I'm not going to tell you right now that this is how you win an election. You do these 4 things and you did it. No, you have other things. You've got out the vote. You have your actual advertising campaigns. You have what your actual platform says. Because here, I'm kind of yada-yadaing the platforms, right? I'm really saying the platform exists. Does the other thing support the platform? Because that's important. Your leaders' speeches, how they're said, how they're done, what they say, what they look like when they're saying it, how they act when they're saying it. That's really important. You don't want your leader to be disconcerted or disconnected to your message, to your goals, to your platform. They have to be in connection. But you still have to have a good platform. And I don't mean in the wonky sense where it's like, we're going to have exactly 0.5% taxes increase because that is the optimal thing to do, or nonsense like that. No one cares about that. What they care about is you're hitting the key things. In this case, you're doing something about housing, immigration, the economy, like things like that. You're hitting people on the head with those issues in a way that feels comfortable, it's aligned with you, and it makes sense. And because of this juxtaposition here between these 3 leaders, and where we are in the election, early yet, we see here, we only have about a little more than a week, or sorry, a little less than a week of polls since Farage became leader. And again, polls lag actual reality usually, so people are going to be different than what the poll says, because obviously the poll happened before, and now, it's now. Like, the last poll here, Delta poll, June 6th to 8th. Well, today recording, it's June 9th. Day release, it's June 10th. It's different days. Things have happened since then. But I would be willing to stake here, with no projection, no modeling, just looking at these polls and just looking at how these leaders act. Farage is going to functionally be the main opposition to Starmer this election. Will he be able to win enough seats to become the actual formal opposition? Or, in a wild circumstance, the Prime Minister? Probably not. But if we scroll up here, and we go back a stage, where was it? Pardon me, I was looking for something, but I think I did not cue it properly. Huh, should have been here. Well, there was at one point, somewhere, is it? Give me a second. Aha, I found it. We have some of these projections from various different companies who do these things. And obviously, Reform is like 0 seats across the board here. But this is early. Yeah. Like this YouGov poll, or YouGov model, is before Farage became leader. So there is a lot of room here that Farage might be pulling new seats. Might actually go somewhere. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm saying it's not that unreasonable, especially when you start looking at some of these more recent ones that are like 86, 75 for the Conservatives. There's a lot of room for the Conservatives to fall and a Reform to pick up. The thing to look to in the near future, going next week or two, we'll have a good sense by like the 23rd, next 2 weeks. But if these like 17 to 19 polls from Redfield and Wilson here, if that's the actual reality, this like 1916 for YouGov 2, and that crosses, you're going to see Reform form the official opposition, I think, come the July 4th. If, as we kind of have an inkling already, that Labour is going to get depressed too by Reform, so Labour and Conservatives will fall as Reform grows, then more wild things could happen. I don't think there's enough time for, like, a wild card scenario and say Farage wins. I don't know if there's enough time for that, but there is a good chance that he will do really well here because he just is a better leader than Sunak is. And a lot of that is because he knows who he is, what he stands for, what he believes, and how to portray that to people. And Sunak doesn't. I wouldn't be surprised if Sunak doesn't really believe in anything. He's just one of those people who joins a political party to get access to power, not because he actually has deeply held sincere beliefs. But only time will tell. So again, just reminded everyone, comment below if you really want me to do another episode of this before the actual election. And let me know if you kind of like this style of video. This is slightly different than normal. I would have normally done a regular projection video, but I don't have that, so I thought I'd do something a little different. Spice it up a little bit. Never hurts to give it a little try, someone else. Freshen things up. But anyways, let me know all those things below in the comments, but otherwise, I'll bid you adieu, and I will see you next week.